everybody. Welcome back.
Hello.
This is Bad Marriages in the Bible, and we are your hosts. I'm Sean.
I'm Kate.
And we are Dandelion Ministries, where we create space for you to experience the grace of Jesus Christ where you need him. And with creative means, with doing it with art, with podcasts, with music, with retreats and conferences, all sorts of stuff. That's what we like to do. And we want you to actually know his grace where you really don't feel like you deserve it at all and where you really don't believe it exists. That's where you need to hear a word from outside. None of us can drum this stuff up in and of ourselves. Faith is not something that comes in a vacuum. It's not something that you do. It's something that happens to you. It's when you hear a word that is stronger, a word that is from outside that says, you are forgiven and you are loved. So we want you to hear that. That's what we're about. And we love to create opportunities for that to happen. So this podcast is one of those things. And we are walking through all the relationships in the scriptures. We say bad marriages in the Bible because it's kind of, good ring to it. But we've also covered just married relationships, and we've also covered family things. It's always in our place. Our deepest, most meaningful relationships that we experience need the most.
Exactly. And one way, so we're in the book of Hosea right now, and Hosea was a prophet that God asked to marry a prostitute, or she was on her way to be a prostitute, and Hosea knew it.
She behaved like a prostitute.
Yes. She behaved like, she had like a ton of other lovers, and Hosea knew this.
Yeah.
And it happened all throughout their marriage. And in the last chapter 3, we just talked about how he had redeemed her, bought her back from her lovers, taken away her shame at cost to himself, and was so willing to be kind of humiliated while he took her back into her home because he loved her and because he wanted to take her shame away, and was given this supernatural grace to stay with her. So her, what people thought of when they thought of her was that she was wanted, that he wanted her, and that she was redeemed versus a disgraced, somebody who he had cast off. And that is God had called Hosea to do that as a metaphor for the way that he loves his people. So we are like Gomer in the story. We are like this wife who can't stay faithful to her husband and runs after other lovers. And so when you said it that way, we want people to know the grace of Jesus where you need it most.
Mm-hmm.
That place where you need it most is where you are like Gomer. Mm-hmm. That is where the Holy Spirit is at work in your life right now. So for me, at one time it was where I felt resentments. That was where I was most like Gomer. And instead of going to the Lord and owning my own side of the street and making amends the way I had to learn to do through 12-step proofs, I would just sort of nurse those resentments and feel better than other people, and feel like a martyr. It's like this double-edged sword where you feel like a martyr, but you also feel superior, but you ultimately are completely alone and isolated. Yeah. And it pushes you away from the intimacy and the relationships that you want, which only forgiveness and making amends will do. So that was how I was like Gomer, through resentments. Or perhaps you're making some vows. Like, have you woken up in the morning and been like, oh my gosh, I've got to stop doing that, or I've got to not do that today. Where you are making that vow is the place where you need grace the most. That is where you are relating to Gomer the most and looking to everything else other than God for that help. So, most of the time, the other gods, the lowercase g, sound like, let's just sweep it under the rug and let's minimize that, or pretend it didn't happen, or just try harder next time. Sometimes it can take the fact of, let's soothe ourselves by, doing something secret that I don't want other people to know about. Or it can take many different forms. Those other lovers, the lowercase l lovers or the lowercase gods.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is life. So like, it's the double-edged sword of the areas in your life where you feel like you're really killing it and that you are successful and achieving where other people have failed. In other words, known as self-righteousness. Those are some of the worst places. You don't think it, but those are actually the most toxic places in your life. But then there's also the flip side of that. That's usually
That
driving.
can be like an idol, or that can be like another lover to God.
Absolutely.
The self-righteousness.
Well, it's you. I mean, the ultimate thing is when our sin, where it ultimately leaves us, is by ourselves and with ourselves as the answer. And that is a terrible, terrible place to be. We all think that that's what it's supposed to be. We think we're supposed to be master of our own domain. We think we're supposed to be, self-sufficient, autonomous, all of these things that the world celebrates and is preaching at us nonstop that this is what's good. And it is completely isolating. And it is the reason why we even use that somewhat vague and generic term in our opening all the time and as our kind of mission statement. The word need is because the world is telling us all the time that we should not be needy. We should be doing whatever we can to not need others or need help, that we should be able to do it on our own and have other people look to us and be like, wow, they're such an inspiration and they're amazing and they do everything great. Heroes, this is what we worship. And but that is an area of it's a complete lie. The truth is that we are all desperately needy, and we actually we are in desperate need of salvation, nothing less. And so that area is often an area of being like Gomer. I'm sure Gomer was telling herself all the time, like, I don't need Hosea, whatever. She was convincing herself that this frivolous, kind of polyamorous life that she was living, which is it is our culture today. Just go read. There's a section in the New York Times often called Modern Love, and it is the most depressing thing in the world to read. I tell you, half the time, because everybody is out there just at the whim of their own sexuality and their desire. Like, you are just subject to whatever your desire is telling you right now. And everybody's being completely killed by this. I mean, completely destroyed. There was an article just last week about a woman who was talking about how it's hard to love men. And she's a heterosexual, and that she's still can't shake the fact that she loves men and is attracted to men and wants men to love her. But then she proceeded to describe how awful the dating experience is. And because the thing that they're not talking about is how maybe it doesn't work to actually just let sex be the leading thing. I'm going to go find somebody to have sex with, and hopefully that will result in a meaningful relationship. Or just we get into these relationships and then there's no need or commitment to have to actually work through a difficult thing. You just move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And everybody's just being crushed by this. This poor woman was lamenting it. And she was saying she had a lot of faith in the sexual revolution kind of thing that we're in. And that, we're kind of in the in-between time is how she kind of concluded the article, that, we've gotten rid of the traditional heterosexual binary stuff. And now we're moving into this more liberating thing. We don't fully know what it looks like yet, though, and we're not there yet. And I'm like, hey, guess what? This is not new, okay? The world has done this before. Go study any civilization. Go study the Greeks and the Romans. They were doing this too. And so it's not a new thing. And it doesn't work. And so anyway, that was definitely an aside. But the thing, this is where Gomer was. She was convincing herself this was good and that this is what she wanted. Meanwhile, I am sure that she was devastated deeply You don't do this. You don't just run from one person to the next into somebody else's arms and throw yourself into these relationships unless you are deeply hurt and you have some serious hollowness, a lack you're trying to
or you
fill.
didn't, the person you were with last night didn't love you the way you really needed to be.
Exactly.
Couldn't share themselves authentically, fully, vulnerably,
Yeah.
and you couldn't do it either. And so you move on.
My guess is when Hosea comes, we don't get into the reality is we don't get into the psyche of Gomer in this book, sadly. I kind of wish we got some more internal stuff, but that's not what God's going after here.
That's right. We don't.
He's showing just the lack of faithfulness on her part.
Yeah, chapters 1, 2, and 3. There endeth the story of Gomer and Hosea. The rest of it is God and Israel.
Yeah, but if I could just get in, put her on the couch a little bit and get into this a little with Gomer, my bet is that she felt completely unworthy. Her shame was running the roost when Hosea came and was giving her love and buying her back and redeeming her and all that stuff. I bet you it felt good and all that on some level is exactly what she needed. And at the same time, I bet you the shame voices were just so loud that it didn't matter, and they just ran her back out into the arms of somebody else. I mean, we for many years did ministry with folks that were addicted and homeless on the streets of Pittsburgh, and that was something that we watched happen. Like no matter what kind of love and affirmation they were getting or forgiveness they were hearing, that it's not that it didn't have an effect. It did. So many of them were believers, but the shame was still so loud that it would push them back out to just get high one more time. And they'd die on the streets. Our good friends, Mike and Tina Werschmidt, who we love dearly, who have retired and are, relaxing hopefully in their retirement, would talk about that being a ministry of failure. And, but this is the reason why we still had hope in the midst of all that, is because God is stronger than death. I mean, that's what this book is leading us to, that this is actually, God is going to be stronger than death itself, the thing that, the enemy intends to destroy us, that there's hope for us, and there's hope for Gomer. And so we're going to get into the book itself after my very big aside.
That's great. So chapter 4, verse 1, it describes the different ways that they were being unfaithful to the Lord, which we can all relate to. So these chapters of judgment, where God is holding up a mirror saying, this is what you're doing. Let it hit you. Let it hit you in their different areas where you're running after other things, the way Sean was describing, where you're, those shame voices are really strong. So these are it's meant to diagnose. It's meant to be a mirror. It's meant to diagnose. It's meant to pop the pimple. It's meant to, reopen a wound that's infected so that real healing can occur. So hear the word of the Lord, O children of Israel, for, again, the northern kingdom. That's the one that where Samaria is, that Hosea is really speaking to. And they had really strayed far. So if you kind of look down on like a group of Christians now that you're like, oh, they're syncretistic, they've married too much to the culture, God has not written them off. He cares very much about that group of people that are his Christians who don't agree with you. So that's what this is. For the Lord has a controversy with the inhabitants of the land. There is no faithfulness or steadfast love, and no knowledge of God in the land. In French, there's two words for knowledge, savoir and connaître, two verbs. And connaître is to really know, like a person. And savoir is to, like, I know how to work that machine. And so this is not written in French. This is ancient Hebrew, but it's the same thing. Nobody actually knows the way the Lord works. And he's going to hold the priests and then the prophets and the king to that standard. and say, you have been approaching me saying, oh, if we just do these sacrifices, that'll make peace with God. And he's like, no, I want your hearts. And you haven't been showing my heart for to them, that I want their need, so I can forgive it, so I can be the supplier of all their needs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you've ever gone to a church or you're going to a church and they are not speaking to you, the leaders are not speaking to you words of forgiveness and grace where you're actually hurting. You're not hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ, that his blood was shed to save you from your sins, and he's paid the price for you. It's been dealt with on the
Yeah, if
cross.
they don't mention anything about the cross,
They don't say those things, then you're not hearing the gospel. You might as well just go to like a good advice group, like a self-help group or something like that, because that's what it amounts to.
Self-help, or just like community volunteerism.
Yeah, that would be better.
Volunteer. Go love your neighbor. Go love your neighbor better.
Yeah. I mean, that's, if you feel compelled to, which we all do. So this is not a hypothetical. I'm saying if, just to give some space to you as you listen. But the reality is, if you feel that you need to hide where you're really hurting and put on a good face and show something else when you go to church or when you're hanging out with Christians, that's a good indicator that you're not hearing the gospel in that space. That there's no true knowledge of God. And here we hear the Lord hold his priests to a very high standard, and it's because they've been given one thing to do. They are supposed to be his messengers officially, telling his people who he is, and not pulling punches on the law. That doesn't mean that we're sitting there and being like, it's not like we talked about last episode of just like affirmation. It's not just saying, hey, it's okay, you're fine. It's not that. It's saying, no, this is actually the truth. This is what the law says. We don't keep it. We need something stronger. We need a deeper magic, as C.S. Lewis talked about with Aslan. And that is what we need. Jesus. We need actual grace and forgiveness. We need the God who actually puts death to death and undoes it. And that is why God is so angry with the priests, because they basically started to say, you're fine, to the people. Like, hey, we're rich and we're good. Everything's good. Israel's got this we're in a great season, like you said. And so we're obviously being blessed. And so whatever you're doing, it's fine. And they were the ones, in the story of the Exodus, it was Aaron who was the head of the priests that fashioned the calf and then said, oh, it just popped out of the fire that way. Like the priests are the ones that are often leading the charge. And that's why, just to keep the story moving forward on that, this is why Jesus is so ticked more often than not with the Pharisees and the religious leaders, because they're the ones that have the responsibility for teaching the people and for telling them the truth of who God is and his love and grace for them. And they were the ones that were not doing that thing.
And so there's a way to diagnose yourself in verse 2. There's swearing, lying, murder, stealing, and committing adultery, which would be a shorthand of what you're talking about, like sexual. I do whatever I want sexually.
Yeah.
And that I'm like, there's no boundaries. There's no like, this is what's good for you. So
no, they literally think, that's according to that article, they think that is what's good for them,
Exactly. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed. And so, I would love to say we've progressed in society where none of this is happening, but it's happening all the time, every day. And I would say where you're in a place of being really, the angriest, you're probably doing some of that on that list.
Yeah.
Where your need is the greatest. And so the whole land mourns. The whole world is groaning and grieving about this. But he goes on in verse 4, for with you is my contention, O priest. You shall stumble by day, and the prophet shall also stumble with you by night, and I will destroy your mother. So
Gee, that's a little harsh. And I'm gonna
going
destroy your
after your parents.
mother.
Who taught you to be like this? My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge because you have rejected knowledge. I reject you from being a priest to me. And since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. So that the law is not the full word of God, as Sean was talking about. It's the thing that's meant to hold up that mirror, like verse 2 did. It's meant to show you where you need forgiveness, and it's meant to bring you to God who forgives sins, who is a savior of all people. So the priests were failing to do that. They were not bringing people to God to atone for their sin. They were telling them they were fine and everything's great. And the richer you are, the more blessed you are.
Yeah, and make sure you bring your tithe. Like
Yeah.
it's that kind of stuff. Like as they were enjoying the cushy life and the fact that there was wealth, and that by itself, I mean, gosh, that is, if there's not a God that you can relate to, like an idolatry, I'm sure you can probably relate to that comfort and wealth. This is something that we're always seeking after, and the priests were guilty of it too, and they were not staying true to their call.
So I'm going to go on a little bit more because each chapter is going to have a unique form of conviction. So let it hit you in a way that either is going to incite you to pray for somebody or bring you to your knees and ask for mercy, which is good. So verse 9, and it shall be like people like priest. So they're kind of yoked together. I will punish them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. They shall eat but not be satisfied. They shall play the prostitute but not multiply, because they have forsaken the Lord, to cherish prostitution, wine, and new wine, which take away the understanding. I just thought that was insightful. For a spirit of prostitution has led them astray. So that spirit of prostitution where you are looking to everything else, anything else to comfort you, to satisfy. So, and God is, the mercy here is that God is not leaving them alone and is going to take away. You're going to eat but not be sat. You're going to be hungry after what you've eaten, and you will not find the love that you're looking for. And that is part of the mercy of God stripping people down in order to bring them back to himself.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, like, I think often we think of ourselves more in a secular society, kind of post-Christendom now, and so when we think of idolatry, we don't, or some of the stuff we list may sound like it's not religious, but that's the interesting bit here in these verses. Verse 13, they sacrifice on the tops of the mountains and burn offerings on the hills under oak, poplar, and terebinth, because their shade is good. And it just goes on. And then it says, therefore, your daughters also act like prostitutes and your brides commit adultery. So that's him saying, because you do this, they do this, so it's showing that your example has consequences. But he's also showing that this is religious behavior. And that is something that's true about our world still. We don't know, even if you think you're an atheist or whatever, you follow it religiously. Like, we are religious people, and we love to have something to devote ourselves to. And that whole diatribe that I went on earlier about the polyamory and all this kind of stuff, like, people are following this religiously. They believe this is the path of freedom. And there's a belief system that's in there. And it's the same thing that's happening with our politics. It's the same thing that happens with our money, whatever it is. Like, we are actually building and constructing our lives around this thing that we think is going to actually give us what we need and what we want. We all want kind of peace and happiness on some level, or fulfillment, and we're banking on these different things, that are not God, and we do make sacrifices for them. I mean, we say it all the time with career. That is such a common thing, to sacrifice your children on the altar of your career, sacrifice your family for your success. Sacrifice your family because you found somebody else that makes you feel good, and so you're going to leave your wife and kids for this other person, or leave your husband and kids for this other person. This is a religious behavior. You're laying things at the altar of this thing and worshiping it and letting it run the roost.
And that's probably why Hosea is such a prophetic book for right now. It's for all times, but right now, every generation has done this, as you said, but looking for sex and romance to satisfy that hunger, to give you that peace and that place of belonging that you're looking for. No one person can do that, and no amount of sex can do that in all of its various forms.
Right.
Sean, as wonderful as he is, cannot fully like complete me,
I know. Jerry Maguire. It's sad.
But with God at the center, there is wonderful peace and completion and unity. The two shall become one flesh. That's the vision. That's the way Jesus described it. Man shall leave his father and mother and cleave, and the two shall become one flesh. And so that's what the Lord does with him at the center. But without him, that hunger is always going to be there, just the way Hosea is prophesying. So if either the spouse, whatever form that is, or the number of spouses, or just the act of sex is at the center, you will eat but not be satisfied.
That's right. It's like chasing the dragon. I mean, it's like any addiction, like you need to have more because of like the thing that's interesting about it is that it actually does hit. It touches the real place of need, So like romance and sex touch those things.
Yes.
It touches it. And so you're like, oh my gosh, this makes me feel so great.
Right. And you have that
I
experience
want this
of
so
oneness.
badly. And I want to be known so much. Mm-hmm. And this is like a physical
and to be vulnerable with somebody else.
Yeah.
They're vulnerable. I'm vulnerable. We get to be one in our vulnerability. There's ecstasy involved.
Yes. I was naked with them and I didn't feel shame, like this, all of that is in there. And that's what makes it so powerful because it actually does touch it, but it doesn't actually, like you say, it doesn't fulfill it. The closest you get is in the way the Lord designed it, which is in a monogamous relationship where you've actually walked through the pain, you've walked through the moments of misunderstanding, you've walked through the betrayals, you've walked through whatever with this person, and you've stayed true to each other by God's grace. By God's grace. That's the closest you get to experiencing real fulfillment in love, but and it's still, even there, as Kate said, you still are needing more. You still need God's grace and love. You still need his comfort. You need his peace because that is actually, we were made for him, and it doesn't actually satisfy ultimately.
Oh my gosh. And all of the places where I feel closest to Sean and safest have all come out of things I wanted to try to hide from him.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to be known in this embarrassing habit, or in this embarrassing mindset, or in this, body image and insecurity and my inability to let go of my family of origin for so long. And, food addictions and all the ugly bits that you're like, I don't want people to know me there. I don't want Sean to know me there. I want to be like cool and fun and like a great wife. And that has taken Jesus to drag that out of me in a very gentle and loving and reassuring way. And make it so that I had to and use the help of other people because, we loved each other, but there was a lack of satisfaction. There were some fights that were continuing on that weren't getting resolved. There was a lot of shame, internal shame for me. I needed to be able to share more vulnerably with him and be more honest. So all of those things, you don't want to be known in those places. You don't want to have intimacy where you need it the most. And it has to take the Lord to bring that out of you. And then when you've been forgiven in those places, there comes like the real strength and the real joy and the real safety and the real ecstasy and the real fun. So.
Right. Because it's actually the relationship is set free from having to carry that weight because you're
Yes.
actually it's
Yes.
being carried by the Lord and His presence in your relationship, and that's a two-way street. I mean, everything Kate just named is true of me as well, and that's the thing that's so insidious in our culture where it's promising so much fulfillment through sex and love is that it's so powerful because it does touch a real place of need in you, and because you're not actually uh, experiencing that, if it's being done outside of the Lord, outside of a place of real, safety in marriage and faith, then it's only going to exaggerate that need even more. It's only going to make that more insatiable. It's going to be like, oh my gosh, that wasn't enough. Or, it was so great, but then he hurt me and he left and, whatever it is. And so now I need to go find it from somebody else. And like, it just keeps on going. It's the same thing as like any addiction where the demand for it grows, and you have to kind of get more extreme and to try to meet that need, try to scratch that itch. And so this is like no relationship can carry that weight, as Kate said. And especially not one where you actually understand God's grace and forgiveness in its context. And you're walking together in vulnerability before Him. That's the only place where it really actually you begin to really feel peace. The truth of the matter is that, I mean, this is the thing as we wind up, going to close up the episode here. The reality is like, that is one of the lies that we're hearing right now, is that somehow you can find fulfillment in all these things, and you just won't outside of the Lord. You just won't. These are good gifts, good things, sexuality, love, all those things are good things. But apart from God, they are going to not actually deliver. And that's why He's so adamant in Hosea. All of His people were running after all these other things and making them ultimate things and looking for them to be able to be God to them. And they can't. They just can't. And I mean, He says it it's funny, flippantly in chapter 4, where He says, my people, in verse 12, my people inquire of a piece of wood, which I love that, because it's just like a literal idol. They ask a piece of wood for help, and it sounds ridiculous, but that is exactly what we do, or like, whatever it is, whatever idol, it isn't God, it's not alive, and it can't actually meet your need. It can't actually stand in for Him. And that's why He brings it out. That's why Hosea is in the Bible, and why He goes to such great lengths and sends His prophet to do this and to model this and to live it out with Gomer, because he really loves you and He actually cares. That's the amazing thing. I want you to hear that He actually cares about where you're really hurting. He cares about the place where you're actually desperate for love and true grace. And He, through His preachers, through His priests, Kate and I are both ordained, and so we take this word very seriously when He's coming hard against His priests. But He wants you to hear today that He is for you in that place, that Jesus actually loves you, and that He has forgiven you, that you are safe in Him because of His grace for you. He's actually done everything for you. You don't have to perform for Him. You don't have to try to present yourself in a certain way for Him. He knows your actual pain. He knows everything and is not surprised by it, and actually came for it specifically and for you, and wants you to hear His love and grace and forgiveness for you today.
And in fact, just to root what you're saying in a story, how He said, you leave Hosea and Gomer in chapter 3 and then go really into the prophetic word between Israel and God for the rest of the book. But you almost meet this woman from Samaria again in chapter 4 of John, where she has had many lovers.
Yeah.
And the man that she's had 5 husbands. The man that she's with now is not even her husband. So she is like the return of Gomer.
Mm-hmm.
In Samaria. It's in the same
She is a
exact
Samaritan
location.
woman at the well.
Yeah. And Jesus, shows her that he knows all about her and knows all about her life. And that's her testimony. It's, oh my gosh, come meet a man who told me all I ever did.
Well, it's right after he says, because he asks her for water, and she says, if you knew who I was, you'd never be asking me, because the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. And he says, if you knew who I was, because she's like, if you knew who I am, you wouldn't be asking me. And then he said, well, if you knew who I am, then you'd be asking me for the water that fills you to eternal life. Like, I will give you water so you'll never thirst again.
That's right.
And that's when she says, give this to me. And the first thing he does is says, go and get your husband. He does the work, like right there. He exposes where she really is, that real place of need. He says, I know exactly who you are. So go ahead, finish the story.
Well, because the water that will never make you thirst again is his, I absolutely know you, and I absolutely love you and forgive you.
I forgive you.
And want you just as the way you are, and I'm going to bring you to myself. So to your point, when you make anything else the God in your life, and it will not satisfy ever, and it will enslave you, actually. Here in that John 4 story, he is the 7th man in her life. She's had 5 husbands. She's with a guy right now, is not her husband, 6, and he's the 7th. And that, I got this from Justin Terry, the dean of our seminary. He's like, here's the 7th man, the perfect man. Number 7 is like the number of perfection. And so in the Bible, when God has fun with numbers, he's like, well, sometimes. So here is the one that will satisfy that thirst. And it comes through his forgiveness of her, of his washing her conscience clean and saying, you're mine, you belong to me. I am the Messiah you've been waiting for, and here I am coming to you.
That's right.
Nobody else wants to talk to you. You're coming in the middle of the day. You're ashamed. Everybody's sort of rejected you and looked down on you, but I want you, and I see you, and I think you're valuable. And my love for you is even stronger than all of the sin that is hurting and all of the shame that's yelling at you. And one whisper from him that he's forgiven is louder than all of the shouting of all the shame in her life and in our life too. So, because that becomes her testimony. Come see a man who told me all I ever did. Now I'm not ashamed of those things. It's like a wonderful redemption. It is redemption. You've met Jesus when you talk about redemption. That's when I know that you've encountered the cross, when you can tell me about some kind of redemption from him. Some kind of love in your worst place. So that's when we read Hosea, you got to read it with John 4 too.
Amen. Very good. Awesome. Well, it was great to be with you guys today. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening. As always, in the show notes are our web address, dandelionministries.org, a way to support the show. Everything we do is through charitable giving. And then also you can send us your questions and or prayer needs to my email. We'd love to be praying for you. And tell your friends, family, enemies, everybody you know about the show. Subscribe and
tell all your lovers.
And give us a review if you want. Yes. I don't need to address that because we already did in the previous 40 minutes. So we hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening.